Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and this is a full recap of The Black Phone, released in 2022. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. After The Black Phone's successful release in June 2022, over which it made $161 million at the worldwide box office on a budget of just $18 million, as well as being the third highest grossing horror movie domestically of 2022, it was announced in November of 2023 that the film would, somewhat surprisingly, be getting a sequel, soon to officially release on October 17th, entitled Black Phone 2. So, ahead of the new film, today we'll be taking a look back at the first Black Phone and running down everything that took place so you can be reminded of everything you'll need to know before heading to theaters. The movie opens in North Denver, 1978, and in the final inning of a middle school baseball game, as 13-year-old Finny Blake nearly strikes out 15-year-old Bruce Yamada, before Bruce ultimately hits a walk-off home run to seal the win for his team, although he does show some respect to Finny after the game.
Man, your arm is mint. You almost had me.
We then see as Bruce, on his way home, comes across a black van, and after a fade to black, we learn he was then abducted by the Grabber, a serial child abductor and murderer, who's said to have already killed 3 kids prior to his capture of Bruce. Sometime later, we revisit Finny, and are introduced to his younger sister, Gwendolyn, and their abusive and alcoholic father, Terrence, who's shown to have a short fuse that the kids do their best to be cautious of. As the siblings make their way to school, they come across a fight between 2 other students, Moose and the toughest kid in their school, Robin Ariallo, and he shows us why he's considered the toughest kid with a brutal and bloody beatdown of Moose. It seems Moose may not be the only one on the receiving end of a beatdown though, as after class, Finny's chased through the halls and into the bathroom by a group of 3 bullies. However, they're intercepted by Robin, who threatens that if they mess with Finn again, he'll come after them. It turns out Finny and Robin are pretty close friends, as we see the two bonding over some classic 1970s movies, as well as make plans for Finny to help tutor Robin for math class. But those plans sadly never come to fruition, because Robin soon suffers the same fate as Bruce, and is abducted by the Grabber. Prior to Robin's abduction though, detectives Wright and Miller arrived at the kid's school, and asked to speak with Gwen. Curious to know more about a dream she told Bruce Yamada's younger sister Amy about, in which she claimed to have seen Bruce being abducted by a man with black balloons in a van. Since, while they did find black balloons at the scene of both Bruce and another boy, Griffin Stagg's abductions, they never released that information to the public. And Gwen claims that she doesn't know why, but sometimes the things she sees in her dreams actually happen or had already happened. In addition to Gwen, the 2 detectives visit her father at work to discuss her dreams, which infuriates Terrence since he'd already dealt with this in the past with Gwen and Finny's mother, who also claimed to see things that weren't there. So when Gwen gets home, he lays in a beating on her, insisting that her dreams are just dreams and nothing more. With Robin no longer around to protect him, Finny's bullies have nothing standing in their way from unleashing a violent assault onto him, which Gwen attempts to put a stop to by smashing one of them over the head with a rock. But she's immediately kicked in the face for her efforts, while the other 2 bullies continue beating on Finny. There is a positive that comes from getting his ass kicked though, as word about the attack actually reaches his crush Donna, who offers him some comfort during class and even makes herself his project partner. However, things don't stay positive for very long, as Finny, just like Bruce and Robin before him, also soon encounters the man with the black van, who just as Finny notices his black balloons, grabs hold of and incapacitates him. When Finn awakens, it's as he's being taken to the Grabber's basement, whose face is covered by a 2-piece detachable mask, and who promises Finn that nothing bad is going to happen here, so he doesn't have to be scared. Once left alone in the basement, Finn tries to find a way to possibly escape, but all he finds is an old phone that doesn't work, before the Grabber eventually re-enters, now in another variation of his mask with an unsettling smile. And seeing Finn attempting to use the phone, he reveals that he'd actually heard it ring once, but there wasn't anyone on the other end, and he thinks it might have just been static electricity that did it. He has to again head back upstairs for a while though, claiming something's come up, which Finn deduces means he'll be having company, so he threatens to scream if he doesn't let him go, but unfortunately, the Grabber's already completely soundproofed the basement, so with the door shut, no one will be able to hear him. Still, Finn screams anyway, but it doesn't take very long for him to lose all hope that he'll ever get out of here. That is until he suddenly hears the broken phone ring, much to his confusion. However, just as when the Grabber picked it up when he once heard it, there's no one on the other end. Finny then again hears the phone ring later that night though, and at first just thinks it's all in his head, but still he picks it up again, and this time hears another boy's voice on the other end, who's unable to remember much about himself, but does remember Finny, recalling his arm is mint, bringing Finny to the realization that he's speaking to the ghost of Bruce Yamada, who also reveals that Finny's the only one of them that could hear the phone when it rang, other than the grabber. To help Finny in his attempt to escape, Bruce explains that, while he was held captive in the basement, he found a dirt section of the floor in the hallway where the tile was loose, but he didn't have enough time to dig down underneath the foundation. So Finny spends most of the night digging and digging until he eventually needs to rest. The next morning, the grabber briefly returns to the basement to bring Finny some breakfast, and as he exits, Finn notices that he hadn't locked the door behind him, so he prepares to attempt an escape through it before he again hears the phone ring. He decides to answer it instead of leaving, and this time is spoken to by another of the grabber's victims, a paperboy named Billy Showalter, who warns him not to go upstairs as it's all part of the grabber's game of naughty boy, and if Finny tries to leave before the grabber says he can, he'll be beaten until he passes out. So Finn decides to stay, and it's a good thing he did, since we see the grabber, now in a frowning variation of his mask, really is waiting for him on the other side with a belt in hand. This isn't the only help Finny receives from Billy, as he also reveals that when he was trapped down there, he'd torn a long cable from the wall separated from the floor, and so instructs Finny to try and open the basement window with it. Unfortunately though, while Finny's able to use the rope to climb up towards the window, he's unable to unlatch it before the grate breaks off. Throughout this first day or so that Finny's been abducted, his sister Gwen's been having dreams like the one she'd had about Bruce Yamato when he was abducted, seeing more visions of Bruce in addition to ones of Billy and even the grabber himself, stood outside a home with his mask on and black balloons in hand, leading her, despite the beating she'd received from him previously, to go to her father and ask he consider the possibility that her dreams may actually be real. To this, he explains how her mother, like Gwen, saw and heard things that she became convinced meant something, leading her to do terrible things that later made her take her own life, a future he doesn't want for Gwen, and so he pleads with her to stop listening to visions. The cops, meanwhile, have been going door to door asking people if they've seen the missing Finny Blake, and eventually come across a man named Max, who actually lives down in Durango and has just been crashing here at his brother's place, but has spent his time here doing some investigating of his own about the grabber, and he believes he's found the exact area where the grabber must live. But the cops don't take him seriously since he's got lines of cocaine just laid out in the middle of the room, and they're right to suggest the coke could make him unreliable, since it turns out Finny's actually locked in the basement right below him, and that Max's own brother is the grabber, who we see now bringing Finny another meal. Strangely this time, the grabber asks what Finny's name is, which he normally wouldn't care to know, and usually just finds out in the paper. But he feels nothing's going right this time, and it's even made him consider letting Finny go. However, after Finny lies about his real name, the grabber decides against freeing him, and instead attempts to once again lure him into a beating. Later into that night, Finn again hears the phone ring, and this time on the other end is Griffin Stagg, who explains that the reason the grabber's been getting so worked up is because he fears his brother upstairs might be on the verge of figuring out what he's been up to. And this, combined with Finny's refusal to play his game, has made it difficult for him to get any sleep. That is until right now, so Griffin urges him to take this chance to escape. To make it out of the house though, he'll need to crack open a combination lock, which actually used to be Griffin's bike lock. The combination to, Griffin can't fully remember, but he did manage to carve it with a bottle cap into the wall before his passing. So, once having found Griffin's carving on the wall, Finny heads upstairs, quietly makes his way past the grabber, and unlocks the door. However, this draws the attention of the grabber's dog, whose barking then wakes him up, and allows him to chase Finny down in his van before he can alert anyone. When Finny eventually regains consciousness, he's back lying in the basement as the phone rings, with a fourth victim of the grabbers on the other end named Vance Hopper. But unlike the other phone calls, during this one, we're taken into another of Gwen's dreams, which at first is a memory of when Finny saw Vance beat up a kid for messing up his arcade game, before, as he's being taken away by the cops, Gwen joins him inside the cop car and listens in on his conversation with Finny, warning him that today's the horrifying nightmare end of his pathetic little life, while also directing Gwen towards the house she'd seen in her previous dreams, which she's finally able to see the address of before waking up. Finny's phone call with Vance continues on though, with Vance realizing that there's a storage room on the other side of the bathroom wall. Although there's a giant freezer in the way, so to potentially escape through it, he'll need to break into the wall until he reaches a panel with screws that once off will allow him to enter the freezer. So Finny immediately gets to work, bashing the wall repeatedly with the toilet tank lid until eventually reaching the panel in the back of the freezer. But his efforts are ultimately no use, since he's unable to unlock the freezer from the inside. Feeling completely defeated, he receives one final phone call, this time from his friend Robin, who rather than offering Finny a means of escape, tells him that he's instead gonna have to fight back, and has him fill up the phone's receiver with dirt so he can use it as a weapon to kill the grabber. Meanwhile, Gwen rides her bike around the neighborhood in search of the address she dreamt of, and is frightened by a sudden vision of the grabber's 5 deceased victims, who appeared just outside of the home she was looking for. So she rushes to call up the detectives she's spoken with previously to tell them what she saw, prompting them to make their way over to the house as well. However, rather than finding her brother inside, all they find are the buried bodies of Bruce, Billy, Griffin, Vance, and Robin, since this is actually a separate home from the one the grabber has Finny locked up in. Still, things continue to be more complicated for the grabber when his brother Max has a coke-fueled realization that his brother's house is actually located in the same neighborhood where he believes the grabber is hiding. So he heads down into his brother's basement and is shocked to find Finny locked up in there. However, immediately after this discovery, Max is suddenly killed when the grabber sneaks behind and drives an axe into his head. After placing his bloodthirsty dog Samson at the door of the basement to prevent Finny from fleeing, the grabber then swings his axe at him as well. But Finn manages to dodge and run down the hallway, setting the grabber up to be tripped by the black cable Billy had helped him find, which then sends him straight into the hole Bruce had told him to dig, inside of which he'd put the window's metal grate, causing the grabber to snap his ankle. With the grabber vulnerable, Finny begins wailing on him with the telephone, before one of his strikes are eventually caught. However, he's able to break free again by unmasking the grabber, oddly frightening the villain as he tries to cover his face, which in turn allows Finny to wrap the phone cord around his neck before the phone rings again, although this time the call's meant for the grabber, with all the kids verbally taunting him as Finny snaps his neck. He then throws Samson a steak from the freezer Vance had helped him find to move him out of the way of the basement door, and this allows him to make his way upstairs, unlock Griffin's combination lock once again, and finally get out of the house for good and be reunited with his sister. As it was in the house just across the street that the police had discovered the bodies of the grabber's past murders. Sometime following his escape from the grabber, we see as Finny returns to school, now seemingly seen as the new toughest kid in school, and his newfound confidence gives him the courage to sit right down next to his crush Donna as the movie ends. And that was our recap of The Black Phone. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also, let us know in the comments below what you hope to learn about the grabber, Finny, or any of the film's other characters in the sequel releasing October 17th. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.